Okay, there we go. Ah, boy, that did not want to connect today. So, okay, so move through some chapter 11. What I wanted to do, well, let me ask you, you had some questions that you'd asked me the other day, and do you remember? I should have written those questions down.
Well, it had to do more with when we got to number 17, but we can get to there when we get to that point. It had to do with what the agent was and what I just want to make sure I was identifying what is the agent, what they're referring to, whether it's a direct or intermediate, things like that. But I just want to identify in the sentence who the agent was, and you clarified that for me. So, but you maybe put that out if you want.
So, yeah, so we'll come back to that here. I'm going to share this. Here's my class. Okay, so when we were looking at, let's go back up here to function of the middle voice. I just want to review this today. Function of the middle voice is that we have just a direct middle, which is a person raises himself. A reciprocal idea, it says that the men teach, we would say, one another, and there we have a plural. So it's not each person teaching himself, but teaching one another in that context. The indirect middle then is we represent the idea of personal interest. So she is taking gifts for herself. So those were some examples. We have an intensive middle. Forgot this one down the next page. So we represent the idea of strong involvement. He himself is teaching the truth. So sometimes you're going to have a middle voice in that sense. Now I want to skip down to the bottom of the notes, and this is
before you do that question on the reciprocal idea. Okay, is it always going to be in a plural because of one another? Is there ever in a singular, or no, just always plural?
No, if you can't have it singular and be reciprocal because reciprocal indicates that you have a group that's sharing each other. So singular would never work with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Okay. So after the last class, and I realize it's been a couple weeks here, but we had the question about recognizing how to handle the middle voice. So went through, and this is on page 39 on the notes off the website that I have. I've added 5 or 6 scriptures here to kind of help us develop a perspective on looking at these middle voices and trying to see if we can recognize them, because some of them are going to be easy to recognize, because sometimes in Greek, when we switch to other tenses, and we're only looking at present indicatives right now, and in the middle and passive and the present indicative, they share the same ending, same form. The words don't look any different. It's a matter of interpretation then, to some degree. You're going to switch to other tenses. Sometimes the middle, the form, the ending will be different than the ending for a passive. And so the middle and passive will be distinguished in that way. So I wanted to kind of walk through these, and I tried to pull all of these as examples from scripture. And so Matthew 27, 5, and this is talking about Judas. It says, and going away, he, and this is an main so a toe. This is aorist in this case. In this case, he hung himself. Okay, is the word that we have here. And that ending there, he hung himself. Obviously, nobody else took Judas out and hung him. That would be a passive idea. On top of that, the ending is pretty definitive. But even if you didn't know that the endings were different, you would look at this and you would read this situation and you would say, Oh, well, obviously nobody else. The Romans didn't take him out and hang him. The Jewish Sanhedrin didn't take him out and hang him, so he hung himself. Okay, so an example of the middle voice in that regard.
So that would be a direct middle reflexive.
Yes, that's the way I would understand it.
Okay.
Okay,
Direct reflexive middle.
let me look at something here just very quickly. I want to check myself on something. Okay. I just was checking to myself on this. I wanted to make sure that I did call this as an aorist, because it has an ending similar to that of an imperfect, but it has a sigma augment in there that we haven't learned that yet, so don't worry about it. Luke 12:37, then this next verse. Amen lego humin hati peridzosetai. And he truly, I say to you that he will gird himself. This is talking about a man getting up in the night. I believe that's the context. So when he gets up, this middle voice ending on here is telling you that nobody else is getting the man dressed in the middle of the night. He has to get up to answer the door to check on what's happening. He doesn't get up and then other people come and dress him. He dresses himself.
So, right. Again, that would be a direct reflexive then.
It would be.
Okay.
Okay. Romans 6:11 then. One of my favorite verses. Humais logizista ha'autus. And then there's a question about whether there's an I-9 in here. That's why that's in brackets. It's left out of some manuscripts, but necrus. So whether we have the I-9 or not, we still simply function as a verbalist clause. But it says you logically count yourselves to be dead ones. And then it's going to go on and say dead ones to the sin nature, but we only need to go this far. And we have the potential then for this ending here to either that you are become logically counted ones. That doesn't make a lot of sense to translate passive, but you can say logically count. And then to be clear on this, we have ha'autus, and that is a reflexive pronoun, means something that you're doing to yourself. I just a lot of lexicographers take ha'autas, especially when it occurs in the plural, and they treat it as a reciprocal. And I don't think it ever is truly a reciprocal. There are a few passages where you have individuals that are talking, and he uses ha'autus here to say it's kind of like a small group, and they're kind of talking very closely among themselves. In fact,
so it looks like a reciprocal, but it's not translated to one another, but it is in the plural. So is this reflexive, or is it reciprocal?
This is reflexive, because
right.
I'm not counting you to be a dead one. Paul is saying you yourselves count yourselves to be dead ones to the sin nature. So it's not my responsibility to logically count you to be a dead one. It's my responsibility to count myself to be a dead one, your responsibility to count you to be a dead one.
So could I say that because they use that reflexive pronoun, eautus, that it's in a reflexive, direct reflexive?
It is.
Okay.
It is. Yeah. So that is helpful. And I was just going to say there are some places where they treat it as a reciprocal, but I really don't think reciprocal is accurate in those passages. And maybe someday we'll walk through several of those and look at some different places where those are used, and how I think they can be understood. I don't want to I could get sidetracked in talking about that pronoun right there. James 1:21, dexisthe ton emphuton logon. And so this is receive. We've added the reflexive sense. You receive for yourselves the implanted word. So this is, I'm not receiving it for you. I am not being made to receive it, which would be a passive. And so this one would be a
Indirect middle?
intensive. This is an intensive middle.
Intensive middle.
Intensive middle, because you receive for yourselves. There's a personal interest in here in what you're doing. No, not intensive middle, not intensive middle. I really am very sorry on that. It's not intensive middle.
Yeah, I was thinking that it might be the indirect middle.
Here it is.
That's of a personal interest.
I'm looking at the wrong heading there.
Yeah.
So I was just trying to remember how they describe that. Yeah.
Is that right? Indirect middle?
Indirect middle, yeah. So you're
personal interest.
You're talking about a personal interest, yeah.
Yeah.
So you're receiving the word for your own, with an interest of yourself, for your own benefit. Okay, now there's a debate on the next passage, and I've included two verses, one of which has a middle and one of which has an active voice. But I think that I think it helps say something about this. So he's talking about God's anger, his wrath, and it says his wrath, and then it would, and we don't, so the vessels of wrath or of anger. And I would translate this as a middle then. Now, some people take it as a passive, that they were adjusted, or created or formed, but it's cat artidzo, which means to outfit or to adjust, like to mend a net or to set out a joint, bone or a broken bone. And so having adjusted themselves for ruination.
Right, because they did it to themselves.
Right. But
someone's not going to do it to them. It's if you look at it, it's something you do to yourself.
Mm-hmm. But there are people that take this in a passive sense, saying that these people were made this way. And there are, I don't know how many people that fall under the banner of Calvinism do this, but there are certain Calvinists that do take the idea that God made some people for glory and he made other people for condemnation. So they end up developing what we would classify as a dual predestination, which I don't think is biblical.
Well, if you see that sentence by itself, just like that, it would be a middle, but perhaps, okay, if there's context ahead of it showing some kind of situation, then it would be passive,
right,
showing that a situation is causing that.
Right. But if we go to the next sentence here in Romans 9:23, I think we have something that shows that this is middle and not passive here. And that it says vessels of mercy, referring to us, which, this is a plural relative pronoun, which he, and this then is an active voice referring to God, he previously prepared for glory. So vessels of mercy, which he prepared. So God prepared us for glory. Now, why doesn't he use an active voice up here saying that he actively adjusted those people for ruination? And I would say the difference is, in this word prepare is a word meaning to prepare ahead of time. And I would say that this is the way he designed man. He designed man when he created Adam, created him to be a creature for glory. And he's intended the same thing for us. But these people have adjusted. They've changed something. They, in mending their net, so to speak, making adjustments to themselves, they have adjusted themselves for ruination. So this one really is this is an example, 9:22, where there really is some interpretation about, is this going to be middle or passive? And I believe the context, especially contrasted to the active voice here, that God actively did this. that it makes more sense to take this as a middle, that this is something that they've done to themselves rather than something being done to them by God. That
You're
God,
talking about 923 or 922?
922,
Okay.
that's our middle voice.
Right.
Yeah, 923 is an active voice. And
Right.
so 923 is talking about God's work, 922 is talking about their work. So when
Right.
God created creation, he looked at everything back in Genesis to let other scriptures have bearing on this. When he created, he said everything was good. It's this adjustment is what mankind has done to themselves, which is what you were saying at the outset when we first started looking at the verse.
Right.
So anyway, I don't know if those are helpful, but
It is.
but I think it's
Very.
kind of work through some texts and looking at how would you understand, can you recognize a middle voice? And granted, some of these have endings that we haven't worked on yet because we have different tenses. And we
I've
have
noticed also something, another pattern, if you will, when just to determine whether it's passive or middle versus, using not just context, but I notice on a passive, there is a, the use of the what is that? The prepositions,
oh
So I see that, when there's a preposition, I'm almost thinking already that I'm looking to see, is that a passive right away? I'm not thinking middle. In other words, like upo, right? Or D or dia or N, when I see those, I'm looking, oh, this might be a passive already. I'm thinking passive. So my question is, in a middle, is there ever a use of a preposition?
you know what? Let me write a note down to look for that
Because I don't think so. I mean, if it's not, that's going to help us at least identify, okay, is this middle or passive? Because I noticed as I was going through the exercises that the middle ones did not, if I recalled, I didn't see a preposition in a direct agent or intermediate agent or impersonal means, or unexpressed. I don't know what that unexpressed agent might look like there. So CC says unexpressed uses only the passive with no other noun or preposition. So
so you simply you're passive. Here, I'll give you an example. I think I can give you an example.
So there, basically what I'm saying, there might be a passive because of the unexpressed agent, that there won't be a preposition.
Yeah,
and that means
look over in 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. Here, let me stop this for a second here. 1 Thessalonians chapter 1. Let me see if I can find this one. We have a whole bunch of these. We have First Thessalonians is really interesting because you have a whole series of passive verbs in various forms. And let's see if I can find one of the ones I want. Let's go to verse 5.
Okay.
It says, because our gospel did not, and our Bibles translate this as an active, but it's not. Our gospel was not caused to become to you. So that's actually a passive. And so it's a passive form of the word ginomai there. And see, there's an unexpressed agent there. Doesn't say who the agent is. We would presume God. And I think that goes back up to the statement that we have in verse 4, knowing one's beloved by God. There's our word loved, and there's by God, direct agent there, hupo, theou, direct agent, your election. And I would say that election is election by God. So knowing then, brothers, beloved by God, again, hupo, your election, that our gospel was not caused to become unto you in word only, but also in power by the Holy Spirit and by full assurance, much full assurance, even as you know what sort we were caused to become among you. So again, a passive in there. We were caused to become among you on account of you. And so we've got a couple of those right there. There's several of those passives in there, and the agent is unexpressed, but I think the Thessalonians, they would have read those and they would have just immediately go, oh, well, God's the one that caused that. God's the one that caused the gospel to be that way. God's the one that caused Paul to be that way when he came. So Paul can't take credit then fully for what's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So those are passives that are with an unexpressed agent. In the larger context, I think, like I said, you can tie it to God as the agent, but there's a whole series of those in there. In one of my Bibles, I went through and I've got them all I've got them all linked together so I can quickly follow the passives all through there without having to be looking for the passives otherwise. Okay,